Is it time for a mind shift? If you don't know what that means, then join your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Christian pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years, along the journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of faith, life, religion, and spirituality.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Mindshift Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Dr. Clint Haycock. Thank you for coming along with me on this journey. I'm super excited to be bringing you this week's episode featuring Dassi Erlich. I've been talking about having Dassi on here for literally months now. We talked, I don't even know how many months ago it was. I had a fantastic conversation with her. She's out of Melbourne, Australia. She is the survivor of a very fundamentalist Jewish sect right in the city of Melbourne, Australia. And when I talked to her the first time several months ago, she was just about ready to fly out on a huge trip. She was going to stop into New York City, and then from there she was going to head over to Israel. Now, what was she doing stopping in New York City first? It actually does relate to the conversation that I'm going to be bringing you in just a minute here. In fact, if you've seen that film, One of Us, it's on Netflix. It's a documentary about a Hasidic Jewish sect in New York City. That's very similar to what the kind of environment Dassi was raised in Melbourne. And she was going to stop in and talk to some people that belong to this organization called Footsteps, which helps Jews specifically that come out of these kind of high control fundamentalist Jewish groups and sects. And what they do is they help people to integrate into the wider world, because one of the things about growing up in these kind of very insular, insulated Jewish sects or these sort of fundamentalist communities, what it is they're trying to sort of maintain their hold on the past. They're trying to control the flow of time almost in a way to preserve a way of life that is long gone, really. And they have this idea that by instituting very strict laws from the Torah and the Talmud, other sacred Jewish texts, that they'll be able to preserve their way of life. And so for someone who leaves this kind of a sect like Dassi did, and you'll hear her story in just a few minutes, when someone leaves that sect, the problem they've got is much like a person who leaves a cult group, and especially if they grew up in it, what happens a lot of times in these sort of groups is that there's a lack of intellectual development. There's a lack of marketable job skills. Everything you do with your life is designed to support the group, support the cult, support the sect. And so when you actually do leave, if you do leave, and a lot of people, of course, don't leave, but if you do manage to get out one way or another, what happens is you don't have any real marketable job skills in the real sort of secular world. And this is something that Dassi and I are going to talk about. How did she integrate out into the world? What was life like, first of all, in this sect or cult? And that's what I want to ask Dassi is, do you think this is a cult? This is something we talked about the first time we chatted months ago. And I kind of threw some things at her as far as what cults are like, what I've been studying so far, what I've been learning about the way cults operate, high control religious groups, for example, like this Jewish sect. And so I'm going to ask her in this episode, do you consider this community to be a cult, or at the very least, cult-like? And this is what's so fascinating to me, something I learned from Chris Shelton on his Sensibly Speaking podcast, as well as when I had him on my show. And that is, he said, what we're finding out is people all over the world, we're now comparing stories. And as we're removing the ideology, yes, okay, there's going to be differences. Of course there is, theologically and in our belief systems from group to group to group. But the psychological damage, the coercion, the manipulation, the control, the way it's done to followers, no matter what the group might be, and it doesn't even matter, it's not necessarily a Christian or a Bible cult, for example. It could be Islam, it could be a fundamentalist Hindu group, a fundamentalist Jewish sect. You know, it really doesn't matter. the psychological manipulation, the coercion, the religious trauma, the abuse that goes on within groups like this is strikingly similar across the board. And this is what's so fascinating about talking to someone like Dassi, comparing stories really, even though my story, of course, coming out of Christian fundamentalism is totally different than hers. Actually, there's a lot of parallels and there's a lot of overlap between that and the world of the cults as I've been studying it, as I say. So I'm going to be bringing you this chat with Dassi Erlich in just a few minutes. I just wanted to mention really quickly that I got a couple of thank yous to throw out this week. First of all, thanks to Justin Ruff, who is our newest Patreon supporter. Hopefully he'll be added into our closed Mindshift Podcast Facebook group. And I wanted to say a thank you to all the people that have recently been added into the group, not necessarily all Patreon supporters, but supporters of this show, supporters of my podcast in terms of interacting with me, messaging me, chatting with me. I've had some amazing Skype calls. And in fact, one of the rewards of being a member of the group as a Patreon supporter, if you come into our closed Facebook group, I stole this idea actually from Janice Selby, but I've just started doing something completely new that I've never done before in the group. It was just the other night, the 9th of June on a Sunday night, we had our very first Mindshift Zoom call, and we had about 4 people that dropped into the call from the group, and we're going to do this once a month, and this is only something you can access as part of our closed Facebook group. So if you want to be a part of that, we're going to be discussing topics. I think we're going to be talking about the subject of hell next month. Why is it that people are so afraid of this doctrine of hell? Where did it come from? What's the history behind it? And I'm trying to find someone who is an expert in this field, someone who's really studied this, and I might bring them in as a guest so we can actually talk around this idea. Why are people so afraid and unwilling to give up this doctrine of hell? It's been used as a bludgeon, it's been used as a weapon, it's been used to control people really for centuries now. So we need to talk about this. So this is something that we're going to be doing. We have another call scheduled, I think, for the 7th of July when I'll be in Seattle. We're also going to be doing an evangelical gathering on the 6th of July in the Seattle area. We're going to go out to dinner and meet people from the Pacific Northwest. So if that's something you want to be a part of, you can send me a message. We're also going to be doing an event up in Canada on the 13th of July with Neil 604, the atheist from Canada. He was on my show a couple months ago, and we're going to get together. We're going to make the trek up to BC, and so we're going to do something with Neil. Maybe it's going to be on his live YouTube channel on a Saturday night. I'm not sure exactly. We're hammering out the details there. So if you live up in the Northwest or you're in Canada, the BC area, you can come out and be a part of our audience for this event with Neil 604. So it's really cool stuff going on. I am super happy to be a part of what's going on. I'm hearing messages from people all the time saying that this thing that we're doing, not just with the cults and evangelicalism, but what's going on in the world of cults and how we were conditioned, how we were manipulated and controlled, that is hugely important in unpicking the conditioning. And it's a big part, I'm now convinced, of our reconstruction process. How were you controlled? How were you manipulated? And what did they do to you? And that when you start to understand how you were controlled, where this religious trauma that you may be suffering, where does it come from? It disempowers what they did to you. Okay, it doesn't necessarily take it all away, but you can start to point to specific things and say, okay, this is how I was controlled. This is how I was manipulated. And when you start to name it, and that's what I'm trying to do with talking to people like Dassi and others, they can now step back and analyze their experiences from the perspective of many years later, looking back on it and critically evaluating it. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dassi Erlich, all the way from Melbourne, Australia, as we talk about her upbringing in this Jewish fundamentalist sect, or cult, really, as she will describe it in just a minute. So let's go on into the chat with Dassi Erlich and talk about her life and her struggle for survival, really, her fight for justice with Dassi Erlich. All right, I'm so happy to be joined by Dassi Erlich, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Isn't that where you're coming from now, all the way down under? It's almost wintertime there now, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's cold.
It's cold, yeah. You're on the southern hemisphere. I'm glad that we connected again, or I should say reconnected, because we talked, what was it, months ago, and you were about ready to go off on a major trip to New York City and Israel. So I'm really glad that we finally circled back around. You've had time to sit down and actually talk to me. So yeah, thanks for joining me on this show. I'm really interested to hear your story, and I know a lot of people are going to be absolutely fascinated to hear your experiences growing up in a very strict Jewish community. Is it just outside of Melbourne, Australia? Is that where you grew up?
The community is in Melbourne, Australia, actually right in the heart of Melbourne.
Right in the heart of Melbourne, which is not exactly a small city. It's a large city, isn't it? Massive. How big is Melbourne anyway? I mean, comparable to like what any major city?
Well, it's the biggest city in Victoria,
Right.
and I think there's around 7 million people living here. So
Yeah.
it's not a small city by any means.
Not a small city. So you grew up in a very strict Jewish community. I've seen some documentaries on this. There's a strict Hasidic Jewish community in New York City. Is it similar to that? Would you describe it as a similar sort of very insular sort of community right in the heart of a massive major city?
Oh, absolutely. Very similar to that. So a lot of people that live in those types of cities in New York and around the world come to Melbourne, Australia, and would fit right into the community there.
Feel right at home. Was it a fundamentalist Jewish sect? I mean, I know there's different communities, Hasidic, Sephardic, Ashkenazi. How does it fit in terms of the various Jewish traditions?
Well, the community I grew up in, the Dassi community, there's no Hasidic, Ashkenazic, or Sephardic community. There's not enough people to create different communities. So it's kind of like a bit of a melting pot of all those different faiths and the most religious of them.
So it is really ultra-Orthodox, ultra-fundamentalist in that regard? It
is. It's hard to really talk about fundamentalists without talking about what my definition of fundamentalism is. But in regards to the way that the community saw itself, that it was better than anybody else and that we had the right way of living, in that way it was a fundamentalist community.
Because I was doing a bit of reading on this morning. I think I sent you an article or a talking points kind of thing with some issues that we could cover. And when I was reading on Jewish fundamentalism, one of the things that struck me was it's very similar to Christian and Islamic fundamentalism. If you strip away that ideology of the particular religion, okay, they're going to have their differences, obviously major differences, but there's this idea that it's kind of like anti-modernist. It can be very militant. It can be very authoritarian. There's sort of a literalist reading of their scriptures, whether it be the Torah or the New Testament or the Quran. So is that what they're kind of trying to do, sort of create this insular community to sort of protect the followers from the outside world? Is that sort of what's behind creating this community?
Oh, absolutely. I think, the community ticked all of those boxes. So it was a very, very close community. We didn't really have any connection to the outside world. And we were taught to fear the outside world.
Do they try to do a sort of a strict application of the Torah and the Talmud as far as the laws? How does that actually work? I mean, can you describe what was it like to grow up in such a tight-knit but very insulated community? Is that how it worked? They were really trying to control it through these laws in the Torah and the Talmud?
So there are 613 laws in the Torah, and then there are rabbis that have created laws out of that laws. So every single law possible is govern the life in that Dassi community. So, I mean, the laws really, from the moment you woke up till the moment you went to sleep, you are following the way that you're supposed to live according to the law. So you wake up in the morning, even the way you get out of bed is decided by, which way you're supposed to get out of bed, which way you're supposed to wash your hands when you get out of bed, and how many steps you're allowed to take to go and wash your hands. And then even once you're up, and the way that you get dressed and how you put on your shoes, which shoelaces you tie first. So we're talking down to the very, very minute, little things that you do every day. Every single thing that you did, there was a right way and a wrong way to do it. So, getting up and then going to pray, and the men prayed 3 times a day. The women were supposed to pray 3 times a day, but they were given exceptions when they had large families, and the community had very large families. And I mean, as a child, I grew up and I was taught all these laws, how to eat, what I'm supposed to be, what blessing I'm supposed to make before I eat food and after I eat food, how many times I'm supposed to pray, how long I'm supposed to be praying for, what the things that I'm supposed to be reading, what I'm not supposed to be reading. I mean, every single minute of the day was governed by these laws.
And what's the drive behind that? What's the theology behind that? Are they saying that God is intimately concerned about the way you put your shoelaces on, which side of the bed you get up, left or right? Why is it so important to observe all these strict laws, literally from waking till the time you go to bed? What's the drive behind that?
Well, as a young child, I didn't understand that drive. I mean, it was just taught to me, this is the right way to do it. This is the way that you get up, and this is the way that you wash your hands, and this is the way you eat. And, you do this because this is the way that you make God happy. And if you don't do it, you're making God angry. Or, I can't even remember the fear that we had. I mean, I try to remember, but the fear that we had that if we didn't do those laws, that somehow we weren't being a good enough Jew.
And what was the downside to it? If you weren't a good enough Jew and didn't follow the laws, what would God do? What was that fear? You were saying you used the word fear as a primary driver and a means of control, surely. What would God do if you didn't do the laws?
Well, I mean, on the most basic levels, about fitting in with the community and being seen to be, the most religious that you can be, and striving to be the best Jewish person. In my case, the best Jewish woman that I could be by fulfilling all of these laws. But I mean, there's this fear that it's not so much the hell and all of that is not really something that's spoken about in the Jewish religion, but there is something called Gan Eden and Gehenna, which is really the equivalent of heaven and hell. And that's taught from your very little, every time you washed your hands in the right way, and every time you ate the foods that you're supposed to, you're getting like a little tick next to, your name. And one day when you died and you went to heaven, that would all be counted. And if you did enough, you would go to heaven. And if you didn't, you would go to hell.
So it is very legalistic in that sense. It's all about weighing up in the balance, almost like a scale, isn't it? Is if you've had enough ticks in the right boxes and you put your shoelaces on right and you said all the right prayers and did everything, you could get into heaven. That is an unbelievable system to grow up in. And as you say, growing up in it, that's one of the key things I've been studying in this area of the cults and religion. People who grow up in religions. I grew up in fundamentalist Christianity. It wasn't nearly as all pervasive as the way we put our shoelaces on in the morning, but there was still this belief, this idea that as a kid you didn't know any other way. That was just the way it was. We just accepted it as true, and that was normal to us. And yet, when you must have had interaction with the outside world, what was it like when you did have to deal with people out there in the world?
Well, the interaction that we had with people outside of the community was extremely limited. So we're talking about, seeing kids that are our next door neighbors that don't belong to that community. And we were not allowed to speak to them. So when we were really, really little, we would have a couple of conversations and our parents would find out that we were speaking to them, and no, you're not supposed to be talking to the neighbors because they could have a bad influence on you. And from very little, the whole idea that the outside world is something to be feared, and not only feared, but people outside of the community were lesser than you. So, everyone outside of the community is drug addicts and alcoholics, and, they have nothing in their lives. Their lives are so empty. Look at what they have to do to fill up their lives. All of these things that were forbidden to us, going to the movies and reading books and, all of these things. Well, that's what they have to do to fill up their lives because they don't have the Torah. And so from a very little, a little girl, this idea that the people outside of our community was less than us, why would we want to interact with them? Growing up, there was teachers that came into the school that weren't as religious. They were still Jewish, but they weren't as religious, or sometimes not even Jewish. They were told exactly how to interact with us. They were told what they were allowed to say, what they weren't allowed to say, how they were supposed to dress, what they could talk about and what they couldn't. So everything was very vetted. So we didn't really, until I got married, and really had to make my own way in the world, still within the community, I didn't really have any interaction with people outside of the community.
So it was extremely closed, extremely insular. I was reading an article this morning in the Washington Post about that community we were talking about in New York City, the Hasidic, very Orthodox community, about a man who ended up leaving it behind and was excommunicated from his family, lost his children, don't want to talk to him anymore. His ex-wife now has completely turned them against him, and he's trying to make his own way in the world. And the article started out by saying, if we were to not describe who we were talking about here and just listed sort of the way the community treats its followers and the people in it, you'd think this is a cult. This is an absolute cult. I mean, you're talking about, behavior control, information control, certain books are banned, insulated from the outside world. There's this us versus them mentality, witch hunts for offenders, all kinds of things, excommunication. These are all classic cult markers, but we couldn't say it's a cult. How would you describe it now that you've left it looking back on it?
Oh, absolutely would describe it as a cult. I mean, I think it was the last time we spoke and you said something to me about how once a group of people start censoring information, that's really the definition of a cult. And that's exactly the way that we grew up. No TV, no internet, books that were vetted, that weren't allowed to mention anything that in regards to relationships between a man and a woman, because we weren't supposed to know anything about sex. And everything that was fed to us was determined by the community rabbis and the community ideals about what was allowed to be, what was accepted in the community. And that was it.
Yeah, they were in control. And one of the things this article was talking about was that, like many cults, the members of the group are kept in a state of dependency. They're there really they exist to support the group financially and in other ways. And so there's sort of a lack of marketable skills and education as well. They were saying that in this case, in the community in New York City, this man, he didn't have any skills. He didn't really ever have a job. And so when he left the group, it was very hard for him to find work, because he'd said, what have you been doing for your whole life? I've been living in this cult, this community. You don't have any skills. Did you find that was the case for you when you left? Was it hard to integrate into the outside world?
Oh, it was extremely hard. I went through school, and the equivalent, I think, is it the A levels, or what do you have in Britain? You have the A levels.
Same kind of thing. In
Australia, you have VCE. And with VCE, pretty much the school that I went to decided that would be too much exposure to the outside world, because you have to have certain texts, and they didn't allow those texts. So I left school probably with a year 7 maths and a year 7 English, if that. I mean, girls in the community were considered second-class citizens, and our only job in the community was grow up, get to marriageable age, have an arranged marriage, and literally just start popping out babies. I mean, that was your job in the community, and that was what was fed to me from very little, that was my job in the world. And I didn't need many, marketable skills in order to get pregnant and have a child. And that was the only thing that I wanted to do, because that was what, my parents and all the women around me, that's what they were doing.
That was your indoctrination growing up in this cult, really. It is a cult, isn't it? Even though it's a strict religious group, maybe a fundamentalist kind of orientation. One of the things about cults as well is, of course, this is a hallmark of cults, whatever group you're talking about, is sexual abuse. And I know that's been a big issue in communities like this. You had an experience of that too, didn't you?
Yes. So, I mean, I grew up in this community, and within this community, my parents were actually really abusive as well. And again, because that's something that is not spoken about in the community, I didn't feel that I was able to speak to anyone about that. And not only that, the way that the community works, everyone's kind of working towards, kind of marrying off their children. And the way it's almost like, you have to have a certain reputation in the community. Otherwise, the matchmakers are not going to set up your children with other families in the community. And that's the only way really that's the only way to progress in the community. And so everything that is not supposed to be, everything's a little bit taboo, is not supposed to be spoken about, because that could ruin your chances of getting a good match. So, of course, knowing that as we grew older, knowing that we were being abused and our parents were actually different to other parents, that's something that we kept, very, very strongly as a secret, because we didn't want to be different to anybody else. And we didn't want to be seen as something, we wouldn't be set up with matches, and we wouldn't be set up with eligible men, because we came from a troubled background. So I went to school, and the principal of my school was extremely, extremely religious, and she found out that about our home life, and she realized that we were vulnerable, and she was a predator, and she took advantage of that vulnerability to suit her own needs, and she sexually abused not just myself and my sisters, but many of the other young girls in the community that came from vulnerable backgrounds.
When we talked before months ago, you were telling me your story, a lot of it has been a sort of a lifelong battle to shed light on this particular woman, and that's been a huge struggle, isn't it? And that, I know we'll get to this, I think, later. Your trip to New York and Israel was part of that journey, wasn't it, to try and bring justice? Because I think she's since moved to Israel. She lives in Israel now, doesn't she, this woman?
Well, she didn't just move there. When the allegations were put to her by the school community, the school board decided within hours of putting the allegations to her to pay for her tickets to leave Australia so that she could flee the jurisdiction. Before they reported it to police, before they reported to anyone, they knew that this was something that the community wanted to hide. There was something that they didn't want to speak about. So they put the allegations to her, I think, at 8 o'clock in the evening, and by 1 a.m. that morning, she was on the plane to Israel.
She was out of there.
Had fighting extradition since then.
That's an unbelievable story, and I do want to get into that later on, but let's talk about your leaving the group, because you were abused. It was a horrific situation, and as in many cults, again, these markers, they sort of hit these sort of tick all the boxes, don't they? There's a lot of sexual abuse and other kinds of abuse that is then covered up for various reasons. The group doesn't want the publicity to come out or whatever. It might make them look bad. And so they'll enable, in this case, the flight of this particular woman who was clearly an abuser out of the country to protect her and to protect the group. So how did you end up getting out? Because you said you did get married. Can you talk us through how that journey went?
So I got married at 19. I got engaged at 18, got married at 19. I met my husband around 4 times over 1 week, and by that weekend we were engaged. And the laws around being engaged, it wasn't like a real engagement. It was more like my ideals and your ideals suit each other given the information that we were given, and therefore we should get married. So I really didn't know at all the man that I was supposed to marry. Absolutely had no idea who he was, but I just knew that kind of our religious ideals we were on the same page. So I got married. I moved to Israel for 2 years, lived in a similar community in Israel, wasn't able to get pregnant, at some point became quite depressed, and I decided to disclose the abuse that had happened back in Melbourne. So I disclosed, and that's what kind of set the whole ball rolling. And she was, and Malka Leifa was, and that's the principal of our school. She was put these allegations to her, and that's when the whole story of her fleeing happened. But I came back to the community shortly after, and I was living in the community, and I'm going through fertility treatments, and there's a lot of gossip, and people are talking about behind my back. Everyone knew that I was the person that kind of had basically set, exactly. And that wasn't something to be proud of in the community. So, there's a lot of gossip going on. I'm already feeling quite uncomfortable. But people, for the most part, didn't talk about it. Like, everyone knew that it was me, but they didn't really talk to me about it, just behind my back. Anyway, I get pregnant. I have my daughter, and I get postnatal depression. And I was extremely, extremely depressed to the point that I was suicidal. I was self-harming. I'm dealing with all of these things that are coming up from my past. Wanting to be the best mother I can be for my daughter, and feeling like I wasn't able to do that. And I end up in a psychiatric hospital. And so I'm in this psychiatric hospital in a mother and baby unit. And I really credit this hospital for changing my life. I mean, it was a beautiful mother and baby unit. And there's other mums there, and they're not Jewish. And this is my first contact with women from outside of the community, like intimate contact, like I'm talking to them, I'm sitting down, I'm having conversations with them. And at first, my husband at the time was like, he didn't want me to have any contact with them. He kind of wanted me to just stay in my room the whole time and not really get to know these other women. But as I get to know them, I'm like looking at them and thinking, you know, like, well, where's the drugs and where's the alcohol? I mean, I had been taught all my life that this is, you know, everyone outside of the community, that's how they filled their lives, their empty lives. So, you know, and what I found was that these women were, you know, they were struggling just like I were. They were trying to be the best mums they could be for their kids, and for whatever reason, they had postnatal depression or other issues, and they were there to help themselves. And I found, you know, some of them lifelong friends in some of them. And it kind of blew my mind, you know, meeting these other women and realizing that they were just like me, and that there was no difference between us except for, you know, like the way that, I mean, obviously to them, I looked very different. I mean, I was dressed like a religious woman, and I didn't know how to speak to them. I had no references like to pop culture or anything. You know, I was very awkward. I didn't know how to speak to like people of the opposite gender. I must have been very awkward at the time.
Yeah.
But
well, you were sheltered. You were so sheltered. Yeah. How would you know?
And suddenly I'm talking to these women, and I just realized, like, you know, there's so much more out there, and that opened up my world. And at the time I decided, you know, I don't want my daughter growing up in a community where this is something, you know, sexual abuse and being sexually abused is something that she is going to be punished for. So I decided now was time to go to the police. My sister had gone to the police by that time already. I went to the police, and that kind of set the ball rolling in regards to trying to get justice.
So it's been a fight since then, really, to get justice for you as well as the other victims. I'm interested, though, going back to your experience in the psychiatric hospital, it struck me that essentially what you're describing is you experienced this sort of cognitive dissonance. And a lot of people, you know, okay, here you've been told all your life that these people should be, as you say, drug addicts, and their lives should be, you know, tremendously, you know, dysfunctional and a mess, and yet they're not. So that doesn't fit what you've been taught and told all your life. There's that cognitive dissonance. Wait a minute, this doesn't. You're holding two conflicting ideas. What a lot of people will do is they'll double down. You could have easily gone down that road and said, well, these must be just a few rare exceptions, but the rest of them are all crazy. I'll just go back into my community and go back into that life. You could have very easily done that. So, you know, credit to you for actually going down that road and saying, wait a minute, maybe what I've been taught isn't true, and I'm going to start exploring this in further detail, which you obviously did, and you ended up getting out. But it was not an easy journey, was it? Because what happened to the relationship with your husband? You've still got a daughter. You're still married at this point. You've gone to the police, which wasn't a popular decision, obviously, in the community.
Well, I mean, I sat down with my husband and I said to him, I don't want to be religious anymore. I mean, by that time, I'm so hungry for information, and I'm going out there and I'm trying to understand what I'm seeing, and I'm reading and I'm looking at everything, and I have access to the internet, and I finally, you know, understand what I'm supposed to be looking for, and I'm reading everything I can get my hands on, and slowly kind of I'm looking at the way that my community treats sexual offenders and the like, and I'm like, that's not the community I want my daughter to grow up in. So I sat down with my husband and I said, you know, I don't think I want to be religious anymore. And up until that point, I was already struggling with my religion by that point, and he saw that as a symptom of my depression. And when I said to him, no, this is not a symptom of my depression, I don't think I'm ever going to be religious again, that's when we realized that there was no way that we could continue living together. The community wouldn't support someone that's not religious and religious living together. So that was the end of our marriage. And I was kind of in the psychiatric hospital. I knew that there was no community to go back to. I was divorcing, you know, my husband. I knew that the community would do everything in its power to take my daughter away from me, because that's the way that the community works. And I knew that I was going to have to fight tooth and nail in order to keep my daughter. And I was homeless. I had nowhere to go. I didn't know anybody in the world. And suddenly I was all alone. And again, I credit the hospital for giving me that strength to start life again. And it really was starting life again. You know, it was finding new people, new contacts, trusting them, you know, kind of understanding the way that the world works outside of the community. And that was such an exciting and terrifying time of my life. I mean, everything was new. And everything was terrifying, but it was also so exciting. I mean, just going out to a restaurant down the road, you know, and being able to just eat food like a normal person.
It's a whole new world out there.
Exactly. That was something that was so exciting.
That is amazing. And you hear about, people who leave very controlling religions or cults. Your journey is you could kind of lay that across it, and it fits the template, doesn't it? You finally get out, and that unfortunately meant the end of your marriage as well, which is all tied into the religion and the belief system. If you no longer are a believer, that also means you cannot stay married, and that ends for a lot of people. They'll lose their partner, and if there's children involved and the other partner obviously still wants the child to be raised within that religion or the cults, then you've got a major problem. How have you been able to reconcile that? Because your husband, he's still in the community, isn't he? So how do you divide up time with your daughter? Does he have visitation, or did he get custody, or how did it work?
It was a very painful custody battle, very painful.
I can imagine.
My husband, very clearly stated that he would rather our daughter have no mother than a non-religious mother. And that's the way that he took the case. So, kind of everything was thrown at me at the beginning, and things that I didn't find out till recently. The allegations were made against me, and pretty much everything in order to try and tear me away from my daughter. And for a while, I was given supervised visitation. And I was only able to see my daughter, kind of a few times a week for a few hours, and that was absolutely awful. But as the case progressed, and I was able to show that I was, taking my mental health seriously, and I was doing everything I could in order to recover and to heal, I was given more and more time with my daughter, and eventually I was given primary custody. So at the moment, we have almost shared custody. So our daughter kind of spends her life, kind of going between two very different worlds. And for the most part, I've done everything I can to balance that out for her so she doesn't feel like she's going from a completely secular world to a religious world. I keep a lot of traditions for her because I don't want her having to, kind of deal with that. But of course, now she's almost, 9 years old, and that's something that's become a struggle. And that's something that we're kind of dealing with at the moment.
And it will be, won't it? And it's just going to be an issue as long as she's growing up. Is she going to school in the community still, or does she go to school in like a public setting?
No, so she's going to a religious school, but not part of the religion, like not part of the community I grew up in.
Right, so it's not as strict.
Not as strict. It's still quite a religious school. It's just not as strict.
So there's a little bit of a balance there. And again, this is an issue, isn't it? With anytime you're talking about parents who share a child or children, one of them is still in the cult or the religion, and the other one's outside of it. The marriage may be over, but you have to somehow come to some kind of agreement as to how to raise this child. I can imagine there's going to be some very interesting discussions if there haven't been already. But you've got to be careful, I think. Are you saying you don't want to turn her against your ex-husband necessarily, but you can't just sit by and let him completely expose her to all this indoctrination either? So how do you strike that balance?
Unfortunately, she is exposed to that indoctrination.
Yeah, she will be.
And I've always said to myself, I'm not going to do anything that's going to, denigrate her father to her or say anything bad about him or his way of life. I just keep reiterating, it's not wrong and it's not right. There's just different ways. And I'm teaching her respect and tolerance to other ways of life, because that's not something I was taught growing up. We were completely intolerant to other ways of life. We didn't respect other ways of life. And our way of life was the most, right, best way of life.
The only way.
I'm trying to Exactly, the only way. So I'm trying to show her that, yes, that's one way of life, but there are other ways of living that are just as valid. And that's something that she's struggling with right now, because those are very strong messages. And that's something that she'll continue trying to process as she grows older. But I'm just trying to show her that there are other ways of living that are just as valid, and exposing her to that, not too much, but just exposing her too much, so one day she will make a choice and she will either choose to live a religious life or not. But at least I know that she's making a better informed choice rather than not knowing.
Exactly. In fact, that very phrase, I was just going to bring it up. That's one of the hallmarks of cults and high control groups, is the lack of informed choice, the lack of informed consent, especially for people like you and me who grew up in, as I was saying before, you grew up in these religions we're just indoctrinated literally from day one. We accept it all as true. And this is something I was going to ask you, that I've been learning, that there's two different sorts of people. Those people who grew up in religion like you and I did, and just we didn't have any sort of identity other than the religious one growing up. And then there's people who entered into a religion or a cult later on in life, and they sort of had a pre-religious identity. So when people like that leave the religion or leave the cult, people like you and me, we didn't have a pre-religious identity to recover. We've got to start kind of from scratch. How have you been able to do that? Or are you working on, like you said, it's all a whole new world out there. Are you working on who is Dassi? I mean, how do you put that all together aside from the person you were, grew up to be? You're obviously not that person today.
Well, I mean, interestingly, my identity growing up in that community, not only as a religious woman, but my identity was tied into being a religious mother. So when I wasn't able to get pregnant, I kind of faced a religious crisis, like identity crisis at that time. It was, if I can't be a mother, who am I? And I had to kind of, exactly. And I didn't really work that out then. So when I left the community, I kind of was facing that again. If I'm not a religious mother, who am I? And that's still a process, that's still forming. I know I've been out of the community now a good 7, 8 years, but sometimes when it's certain things, it still feels so fresh. And like I'll bump into people in the community and I'll remember like the way that, that I grew up, and I'll think, wow, like there are really people kind of living that life, and that's the life that I grew up in. And sometimes it feels so separate from who I am now, and then other times it feels like it's exactly, like there's still so much to learn and so much to grow and so much to know.
There's so much work to be done, isn't there? And that it's a lifelong process. I heard somewhere that it takes roughly the same amount of time to reconstruct as it did depending on the time that you were in the religion. So I don't know how old you were when you got out of the community, but you spent all those years growing up, and it's probably going to take at least that many years to rebuild and find your. I don't know if that's good news for you or bad news. But
that's not good news.
Because how old were you when you got out?
I left the community when I was 23 or 23, right. 24, and now I'm just about to turn 32.
So you got a few years of work left to do. Well, it's a lifelong process, I have to say. But I'm still learning stuff all the time. I've been going through a lot of stuff. Education is a primary thing. I don't know how much you've done as far as reading books and finding out about how you were conditioned, how you were controlled. I've been learning that that's a hugely important piece, because as you're describing, you didn't put it together when you were in the religion, when you were in the community. You couldn't see it other than, yes, I'm supposed to grow up. I'm supposed to be a mother, a good Jewish mother that pops out babies, and that's my role. That's my identity. And when you couldn't do that, you were crushed. But now you can step back and go, wait a minute, I see how they were doing this to me and to others, and it helps to kind of unpick that conditioning. So I don't know if that's helpful to you. Have you kind of done a lot of study around that area of the sort of psychology behind it?
I've done a little bit of study. I do understand it. I do quite a bit of public speaking in regards to, kind of a fight for justice. And that's some of the things that I do cover. I'm kind of still working out like my journey on understanding if there is a God, if there isn't a God. That's a whole different journey. And that's something, that I'm still kind of working out, and I'm pretty sure that I'm an atheist, but that's a journey in of its own. But when so conditioned in you that there's definitely 100% a God, and this is the way he wants you to live. And then my daughter comes home and I can't say to her, well, I don't believe in God. That's kind of something that, it is kind of where I'm at the moment. I guess, kind of understanding the conditioning and everything. I'm beginning to understand that more as I watch my daughter go through that. And that's something that I'm continuing to understand and to learn.
But it sounds like you're able to strike a pretty healthy balance with your daughter from what you're describing. You're not, because you could easily go way the other way, couldn't you? And say, listen, what you're being taught in school, it's all wrong. It's all, this is what happened to me. There is no God. If you did that, you'd probably end up devastating her as well. So yeah, you've got to be super careful in that regard. Man, I can't imagine how you must try to struggle through that and strike that balance for her anyway, for your own sort of mental health.
Oh, it's a constant balance. It really is a constant balance.
Yeah, it's got to be tough. Now, going back to this issue, we were talking about your abuse by this principal growing up in school. What happened there? Because before, when we were talking several months ago, as I mentioned earlier, you were about ready to fly out to New York and then Israel. That was part of this story. Can you give us an update on what ended up happening now that you're back from this monster trip?
Well, we're back and about to get ready to go again.
You're going again. It's a good thing I caught you today then.
It's not, it's far from over, unfortunately. I think where the last thing I told you was that, she fled to Israel. So in 2014 or 2012, Australia asked for her extradition after they had 74 charges of sexual abuse and rape against her. And in 2014, the Israeli police arrested Malka, and she was in jail, and she managed to get bail and get out on house arrest, and refused to turn up to court again and again, citing, saying that she was mentally unwell and that she couldn't face, getting into a court, and she was so sick that she couldn't actually walk into a courtroom. And the way that the Israeli court works is, if the actual person is not there in the court, they can't have a case. So by actually just not physically turning up, there was nothing they could do. And she was checking herself into a psychiatric hospital a few days before every court hearing, then checking herself out. And everyone could see that she was playing this game. But then in 2016, the judge, after I think it was by that time 20 court hearings, that this is enough, and he suspended the case. And she was supposed to go before a psychiatric committee, once every 6 months to see if they can open up this case again. And this kind of happened until 2017. And then 2017, there was this picture of her walking around, someone sent her this picture of her in this massive religious festival. And she's claimed to be so unwell that she can't physically get into a courtroom. And here she is, one of the biggest religious festivals in Israel, hundreds of thousands of people, and claiming to be, mentally unwell. So I decided, this is just wrong. She needs to face justice, and we want to face her in an Australian court. So I started a campaign called the Bring Life Back campaign. And I lobbied, the government here in Australia, and I met with the Prime Minister at the time, and then we started lobbying the government in Israel, and we want justice. And through that lobbying, an organisation called Jewish Community Watch decided to hire a private investigator, and they hired this private investigator who followed Malka for 2 weeks and found that she was living a completely normal life with absolutely no hint of mental illness, not to the point that she was claiming. So they gave that to the police, and the police rearrested Malka on charges of fraud and obstruction of justice and feigning mental illness. And she's been in jail since then, which was February 2018. But she has not given up on this idea that she's too mentally unwell to face court. So it's been another year of, constant court hearings and trying to get bail and all of that, and it's just going on and on and on. And so we've been to Israel a few times, and we've sat in the court hearings. She hasn't turned up at those hearings, saying that she's too unwell to come from jail. And pretty much the media has really become very aware of this issue, and they've followed us all across the world. And that has definitely raised the pressure. But during our last visit in Israel, another private investigation was kind of going on, and basically came out just before we went to Israel that the Israeli minister in the Israeli government was helping Malka to avoid justice. I mean, we're talking about, wide scale cover up. I mean, this is the health minister in Israel, and it's alleged that he was, pressuring psychiatrists to say that she was mentally unfit. And people, when I went to Israel and with my sisters, and, we're talking to the media, and they're, now seeing the people that are behind Malka, does that make you intimidated or scared or worried that you won't get justice? But I really, really think that, given the amount of awareness about this issue and the amount of support we have behind us, that we will one day face her in an Australian court. And actually, the final ruling on her mental health is supposed to happen this September. And so we're planning on going back there to Israel to hopefully hear the ruling that we want to hear.
Hopefully, yeah. So all these trips to Israel they've been about you making. Have you been making court appearances as a witness against her, and then she doesn't show up? And it's crazy to think that even the higher ups in the government are helping to cover it up. I mean, what's in it for them? What are they hoping to get out of helping her beat the rap? I don't understand.
Well, this minister that we're talking about that's alleged to have helped her belongs to the same religious sect as her. So I don't think he can say anything more than that.
That's all you need to say. He's trying to protect the reputation of the community, you think, and you can't have this allegation come out because it might besmirch the name of that particular community. I think, is he just protecting their reputation?
I don't even know if it's about reputation anymore. I mean, there's no one in Israel that doesn't know about this story. Everybody knows the allegations against her.
That's
it's about
so widespread.
Sacrificing the individual for the institution. That's what it comes down to. It's like at some point, they don't even care what's happened. It doesn't matter if she's guilty or not, but they're going to protect the institution over the individual. And that's it. That's what it comes down to.
But again, that goes back to what I've been saying, the markers of cults. I spoke with some friends from Melbourne as well, Stephen and Laura, recently for a podcast. They're ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and this is what they're working on. They're trying to blow the lid off of childhood sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witnesses community, not just in Australia, which is endemic, but it's worldwide. Because, as you say, same exact thing, the higher-ups in the organization have covered it up. Same with the Catholic Church. I mean, you've got Cardinal Pell down there in Australia. That's been a huge story that's just come out in the last year or so, isn't it? Again, The Catholic Church has covered up so many priests that have abused children worldwide, not just in Australia, but worldwide. Again, to protect the reputation? I mean, it's just unbelievable within these religious communities how they protect abusers and let the victims suffer, which is a person like yourself.
Well, they don't want to believe that this can happen. And if they believe it, then, well, what is our community doing about it? And then we're not better than everyone else if we believe that these things happen in our community. So as long as we don't believe that it happens in our community, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that we believe that these things don't happen in our community, we're going to sacrifice the people that those happen to, because we don't want to believe that people that, do all these religious laws from morning to night could do something like that.
Exactly. If you tie it back into the theology of the group, isn't it, where you're saying what they're actually exactly what you just said, that we're the religion that's the truth. We have everything figured out. We're the one true religion, whatever it is. How can this possibly happen in our community? It's not possible. So we'll just deny it. We'll cover it up, as you say, and unfortunately sacrifice the victims like you and so many others of this woman on the altar of expediency or their theology. It's unbelievable when you actually break down the psychology of what's behind it. It is truly staggering, isn't it?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Unfortunately, what we learned when we were in Israel, that the reason that Malka Leifer came to Australia was for very similar reasons why she left Australia. Israel was trying to get rid of their problem. And so she came to Australia because what was happening in Israel, they wanted to get rid of her. And then, unfortunately, we also learned that when she went back to Israel after leaving Australia, there's, allegations of abuse against her again. I mean, these predators, they don't stop. And the community the community here still says, we did the best that we could do. We took her away from our community's kids. I mean, what about the kids in Israel? Do they not deserve to be protected?
Exactly.
I don't understand that concept. We took her away from our kids. Well, what about the other kids that she could hurt? That doesn't make any sense to me.
But the Catholic Church has done the same thing for decades that we know of, exactly the same. Here's a priest in a particular parish. He abuses children. As soon as that starts to come to light, they'll move him to another parish, maybe in another city, and he does it again. And as soon as those allegations come to light, they've moved him to another parish. So it's exactly the same MO in these, again, Catholic Church or Jehovah's Witnesses, other religions. It's unbelievable how they'll protect the abuser. It's truly staggering. Well, now I'm interested to hear what we'll hear an update, I think, hopefully in September when you're going back to Israel. We can keep in touch. I'm very interested to hear. Do you think that's part of your your own sort of reconstruction of your identity, your recovery of your identity, to stay in this fight against this woman and the system. Really, now it's become about fighting the system, at least in Israel and maybe in Australia too. Is that part of your journey as staying in this battle?
I think it is. I
Gotta be.
kind of sometimes I really struggle with it because I hate to think that the sexual abuse that I experience is now part of forming who I am. I hate to give it that much power. But you know what? I mean, the power that we've been able to have of having this voice and having this support and being able to talk to people and raise awareness about this issue, that has been pretty amazing. I mean, I've learned so much from this campaign, and I've been given so much, through this campaign, and it really has shaped who I am today. And yeah, it's been an incredible journey.
And you're still on this journey. It's not ending for sure, isn't it? You've got to go back in September, and there's every chance. What if she doesn't show up? The battle continues on. Well, I'm interested in reading this article in Washington Post. They were talking about there are organizations specifically for people like yourself who come out of Jewish fundamentalist or controlling sects or communities. Are you aware of any organizations that people could tap into? They've come out of specifically Jewish backgrounds like yourself to sort of recover their identity and transition into the world?
Oh yeah, well actually, I mean, there's an organization here, and I'll tell you about it in a minute. But it was when we went to New York recently that I met up with an organization there called Footsteps. And I don't know if you know the film One of Us on Netflix. It talks a little bit about that organization.
I was going to mention that. Yeah, that's a very similar community to what you grew up in, isn't it?
Yeah. So I met with the directors of Footsteps while I was there, and I gave a little speech at the Footsteps organization. And there's a small and growing organization here in Australia based on that. It's called Pathways, and it's absolutely wonderful. I mean, it's just that point of contact for people to have. I wish it would have existed when I left the community. It didn't, but it does now. And, I still go to their kind of monthly meetups and just sitting around with people that understand that journey that you've taken to leave a community. There's just something about it, even if you're not speaking about it, it's just sitting in a room with other people that just get you on some level that other people really don't.
It's very empowering, I think, to find people, like you say, that come out of the share that narrative. I think it's two things. It's empowering, and then secondly, it's validating. It validates your experience. And you say, okay, I'm not the only one. I'm not crazy. This has happened to other people, and I'm not alone in this thing, and I'm actually part of something that's going somewhere, and it's helping people. So I'm glad to hear that you're part of this not Footsteps, it's Pathways, isn't it, down in Australia?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is really cool. Now, as far as people being able to get a hold of you, if they wanted to find out more about your story and contact you, what's the best way to get a hold of you in terms of social media?
So I have a Facebook page. It's called Dassi Erlich Beyond the Survivor. And that's pretty much just talks about, that's regularly updated about what's happening with the campaign, the court hearings, protests, petitions, all of that's on there. Any media appearances that we do, and I feel like sometimes that's our life at the moment. But, I mean, it's all on there, and that's the best way to contact me.
So go to the Facebook page. What I'll do is I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So if people want to get a hold of you and understand a little bit more about what's going on in this campaign, then they can follow you on Facebook, and then hopefully people will contact you. Especially, I'm very curious to find out if anyone comes out of that Jewish background specifically. So I'm interested to hear from viewers or listeners, I should say. We're watching this live on Skype right now, but people are just going to be hearing the audio of our voice, aren't they? But so yeah, people that are listening to this, I'm hoping they'll be able to contact you and at least get in touch and find out where you're going next and what your next steps are in this journey.
Oh, and it's a riveting journey. There's always something happening.
Always something happening. Well, listen, Dassi, this has been great. I've really enjoyed contacting you again. I'm so glad that we finally got back together. I was getting a bit nervous there. A few months went by, and I thought we kind of messaged each other, and I'd say, are you around? Are you okay? I knew you were super busy, and there was a lot going on. So thanks for taking the time to talk to me. It's evening there. It's winter there, so hopefully you've been staying warm as we've been talking. we definitely will keep in touch with you and keep people updated as to what happens in your case with this woman.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, thanks for connecting. It's been great to meet you and to talk to you. And I think what you're doing is incredible. Just opening up the conversation about this is so needed and so important.
It's so important. And again, I keep coming back to the psychology of it. It's so similar when we compare stories. Yes, the ideology is different. It absolutely is. But yet, the psychological damage, the sexual abuse, all the things that go on in these high control religions and cults and groups, we need, and this is something that Chris Shelton, I don't know if you heard that episode I did with him, he came out of Scientology, and he said, what I'm doing in his work on his show on YouTube and his podcast is talking to people like you who come out of different religions, but our stories are so remarkably similar once you strip that ideology away in terms of the psychology of it. So I think that's really, really, really important to do. So I'm really glad that you're sharing your journey with us, because I know it's going to help people.
Yeah, and just on that note, actually, the Australian government recently gave an apology to sexual abuse victims. And I went up with Lara and Stephen, who you spoke to recently on your podcast, and met there with a whole group of ex-Jehovah Witnesses and Anglican, people that had left their community. And like you said, our stories were all so similar. I mean, all coming from such different backgrounds, yet the way that each community had covered up their abuse and then blamed the victims were just all so similar. And it was quite interesting to connect in that way.
That's exactly it. And that's what people like Chris and myself and you and Stephen and Laura were uncovering, that the psychology of these cults is remarkably similar when you actually look at how they are able to control, coerce, manipulate people. And that high control, that patriarchal narrative especially, it becomes a breeding ground for abusers, first of all. And then secondly, there's this atmosphere of the cover-ups and all that, which it's kind of inevitable from the first thing. So these cults and religions, they have this strikingly similar sort of dynamic that goes on. So it's important, as you say, to uncover that and go, okay, your story's similar to mine. Why is that? I'm a Jehovah's Witness, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm whatever, but we're all sharing the same narrative. So it's great that you've been able to share your story with so many people.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Okay, well, I will let you go, Dassi. You're going to enjoy your day. We're going to head off down to Birmingham to say goodbye to some good friends. In fact, the guy who records the introduction for this podcast, he's unfortunately having to go back to Canada. So we're going to say goodbye to Mike and Cheryl today. So I've got to get going. I know you've got to get going. Thank you so much, Dassi, for being a fantastic guest here on Mindshift Podcast.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. Bye.
I wanted to say as we close here that there was a huge thank you I forgot to add in the introduction to Stephen Unthank and Laura Caput. Laura, I think, is the one who put me in touch with Dassi. They met, as Dassi mentioned in this episode, they met around this issue of this investigation by the Australian government into institutional child sexual abuse. And in fact, if you remember my episode with Stephen and Laura, they're both ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, but they met Dassi because she, as she described, she's a sexual abuse survivor too, and this horrific experience brought them together as they were all getting involved in this Royal Commission into childhood sexual abuse. And something that's come out, as we talked about in the show, that this is a worldwide problem. It's a pandemic. It's not just in Jewish cults like the one Dassi described. It's in Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and Catholic churches, Christian churches. It's everywhere. And I'm glad to be shining a light on some of the stuff that's going on. And in fact, I had a Skype chat the other day with John Metter. He contacted me the other day. He's out of Austin, Texas. He works for the DA's office there. And we're going to be doing a podcast maybe in a month or so. I'm not sure exactly. But we had a really good Skype chat. And he, as a district attorney working out of that office, he has investigated some cases of church leaders, pastors, homeschoolers who were sexually abusing their children, and he is very passionate about bringing this to light. So as am I. So this is something we're going to be talking about maybe next month. So definitely stay tuned for that. Now, what's coming up in the next few weeks here on Mindshift Podcast? Well, I've had a fantastic conversation. I've already done this recording with Flo Conway and Jim Siegelman out of New York City. They're the authors of the books Snapping as well as Holy Terror. They've written some other books, but I've read my way through these two books, and we had an amazing conversation, not only about the phenomenon that they recorded in those two books, especially around this area of the Christian fundamentalist, the attempted takeover of the political scene in America, and not just America, but around the world. It's a global culture war, and we're seeing this now. For example, things like what's called the Project Blitz and Dominion theology. These are things that are very real, and I've been tweeting out about some of this stuff, and I've had some people alert me to more resources, what's going on in American politics, and indeed worldwide politics. And so we had an absolutely unbelievable conversation with Conway and Siegelman, so that's going to be coming out the next couple of weeks. I've also got a call scheduled with Janja Lalich, Dr. Janja Lalich, who is a cult expert. She's a sociologist and former cult member herself. We have been trying to get together. We haven't been able to work it out for some reason, but I am finally going to be talking to Dr. Janja Lalich. I've also got an episode coming up with Natalie Hoffman, and we talk about escaping emotionally abusive, that is, relationships, and the connections with cults. Because as we're going to find out, there's a lot of connection, a lot of correlation between the way cults operate and people that are in emotionally abusive relationships. So that is another fantastic conversation that I've already had with Natalie. So these are some episodes coming up over the next few weeks. So look for those. Thank you for joining me here on Mindshift Podcast along with Dassi Erlich. You can also find in the show notes a link to her Facebook page. She did mention that in the show, but I'll put that in the show notes. If you want to get a hold of Dassi, you can always find me too on Twitter at Mindshift 2018. You can message me there. You can follow the tweets that I put up. I put a lot of stuff up about the cults and what's going on currently with some of the cults, especially the evangelical, the fundamentalist ones, and they're very, very sly, very sneaky, so you have to be very careful to investigate what's going on. So check me out on Twitter. You can get a hold of me there. You can also look up the Facebook page, Mindshift Podcast Facebook page, so there's ways to get a hold of me. Thanks also to John A. Moore for providing the music for this show. I'll see you in a couple of weeks with Conway and Siegelman as we talk about their books Snapping and Holy Terror. Thanks for joining me. I've been your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, on Mindshift Podcast.